Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding the brand new 2026 U.S. News Medical School rankings. This list is basically the Super Bowl for prospective medical students and faculty. Everyone waits for it. But right out of the gate, as we look at this year's newly released Tier 1 data, there's a glaring, massive mystery staring us right in the face.
Right? You look at the top tier of the most famous medical school ranking in America, and the absolute biggest names in medicine are just gone, completely missing. We're talking about heavyweights like Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins. These are schools that have literally defined global medical education for over a century, and they aren't just ranked low, they are entirely absent. So where on earth did they go? And what does this actually mean for how we judge medical excellence in 2026? Well, to understand why this happened, we've got to look back at the Great Rankings Boycott. Starting around 2022, a huge wave of elite medical schools just pulled out of the U.S. news system entirely. They loudly criticized the rankings for creating, frankly, perverse incentives. The dean of Harvard Medical School argued that the old system forced admissions committees to obsess over sky-high MCAT scores and GPAs rather than looking at candidates who actually wanted to serve underserved communities. The rankings, they said, rewarded exclusivity over the actual mission of medicine. So by the time we hit this 2026 edition, roughly 20% of the schools that used to be in the top 100 are completely absent. U.S. News just labels them as unranked.
Okay, Section 2, the new rules. Tiers versus numbers. U.S. News had to adapt fast to survive this boycott.
To keep their credibility, they completely rewrote the rules of the game. We finally moved away from the false precision of the old system. Because think about it, is there truly a meaningful real-world difference between the number 4 and number 5 medical school in the country? Almost certainly not. But the old ordinal system presented that gap as an absolute fact, which caused schools to totally game their metrics just to jump a single spot. Now the new system groups schools into 4 broad performance tiers, and within each tier, schools are simply listed alphabetically. No more splitting hairs between truly excellent programs.
So, how is this 2026 list actually built? Well, to be a Tier 1 school today simply means you mathematically scored in the top 15% of all evaluated programs. So the 85th to 99th percentile. It's honestly a much more accurate reflection of how medical education works at the highest levels.
Let's look at the first of the 2 distinct tracks U.S. News now uses to evaluate schools, the 2026 Research Tier 1, featuring the new heavyweights.
Now, the methodology driving these research results is fascinating. A massive 60% of a school's research score is now driven purely by NIH funding and research activity. And you know what's completely missing here? Those subjective peer reputation surveys? Gone. U.S. News finally admitted that residency directors don't actually care about magazine rankings when picking candidates. So the research rank is now a hard, numbers-driven game that heavily favors massive academic centers pulling in federal grants.
Because of this intense data focus, the 2026 Tier 1 research list reveals a really cool shift. Sure, your traditional private powerhouses like Yale and Vanderbilt are there, but we are seeing a massive surge from public research engines and emerging Southern powerhouses. Schools like the University of Florida, the University of Colorado, and USF Morsani have officially locked down Tier 1 status. It essentially proves that if you have the NIH funding, the hospital network, and the scientific output, you are firmly in the top tier today.
But hey, what if you don't want to run a lab? What if your passion is being right there on the clinical front lines? That brings us to the 2026 Primary Care Tier 1, the Clinical Champions.
As experts pointed out during this whole transition, a Tier 2 school with exceptional primary care training and a strong rural medicine program might actually be a far better fit for many students than a Tier 1 research powerhouse. The primary care track completely flips the script. Instead of rewarding schools that just chase grant money, it rewards programs that actively produce primary care and rural doctors to serve in health shortage areas. It's all about measuring real-world impact on community health.
And because of this, mission-driven public universities and osteopathic or DO programs get elevated right into the prestigious Tier 1. Just look at these winners: East Carolina University Brody, the University of New Mexico, and UC Davis. Plus, DO schools like William Carey University and Western University of Health Sciences are rightfully getting their flowers here. They are the ones actually dominating the effort to solve America's critical doctor shortage in underserved areas. Moving on to our next section, the missing giants. Let's uncover the Tier 0 reality, because we absolutely need to talk about those boycotting heavyweights like Harvard and Stanford.
Okay, just wrap your head around this number, $866 million. Based on the latest data, Johns Hopkins alone pulls in over $860 million in total NIH funding across its institution. They are an absolute juggernaut of medical research, and they do all that despite flat-out refusing to participate in the U.S. News data collection.
Raw NIH funding data, which is the exact metric U.S. News relies on to judge research excellence anyway, reveals a totally hidden reality. Schools like Washington University in St. Louis and UPenn are pulling in well over $600 million. Alongside places like UCSF, these institutions are clearly operating at the absolute pinnacle of medical research, regardless of whether some magazine formally ranks them this year or not.
Plus, when we look at global academic citations, which basically measures the sheer worldwide influence and impact of a school's published medical research, Harvard and Johns Hopkins remain the undisputed worldwide centers of medical influence. Because they operate at a level that totally transcends alphabetical tiers, experts unofficially refer to these institutions as a permanent Tier 0. They are massive, impact-driven ecosystems that are going to remain at the top of the medical world, with or without U.S. News.
So, bringing it all together, beyond the tiers, choosing your best fit. How do you actually navigate this fractured 2026 landscape?
Because the medical education system is no longer defined by a simple, one-size-fits-all scoreboard, you've got to use a smarter, more personalized evaluation framework. First things first, completely ignore the unranked penalty for those elite boycotting schools. It literally tells you nothing about their educational quality. Second, align the school's specific track, research versus primary care, with your actual career goals. Third, and honestly this is probably the most crucial, heavily evaluate the school's residency match data, because that dictates where you'll actually practice. And finally, think about the physical location, the clinical training sites, and the specific patient populations you'll be serving.
Ultimately, no alphabetical tier system can replace your personal mission in medicine. So the most useful question to ask isn't what tier is this school? It's simply, what kind of doctor do you want to be? And which program is going to give you the exact tools, mentors, and clinical exposure to get you there? As the traditional monopoly on prestige continues to break down, the power of choice is finally shifting back to where it belongs, to the students, the communities, and the patients they will one day serve. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.